wanted to be an architect but read literature at university, switched to an MBA and ended up as India's most famous male fashion designer. Now, does that make his life a miracle or a big lucky accident? Here to talk about it and give us the answer is the man himself, Tarun Tehiliani. Welcome to the program, Tarun.
Thanks for having me. Nice
But what's the answer? Tell me. A miracle or a lucky accident? What makes you a fashion designer?
Well, I think it's a big lucky accident. It's a miracle that I survived the various things that happened along the way. I actually much rather have been in architecture, I think. You know, it's just that you had to go through physics and chemistry. And I thought at the end of the 10th at Doon School that it was a miracle enough that I'd survived chemistry for 3 years and got through ICSE. There was no way, even if I wanted to go to the Delhi School of Architecture, that I could do this for another year or two. And so I kind of tootled along, and I had no really idea what I wanted to do. I always sketched and drew. But, you know, at that point, Karan, there was no fashion industry in India. I mean, there was a textile industry. It was unthinkable for, you know, somebody male to go into this. I mean, and there wasn't any industry to go into, you know. It was like this void. It was textiles, women wore saris, and there were textile mills and so on and so forth. And so I was really just drifting, you know. I mean, you did English, and I said, no, after 3 weeks of this, I can't do Plato's Republic. I mean, this really is unbelievable. And so I went off to do economics, and that was fine. And then I thought, okay, well, if we're spending the money, then I may as well do a business degree, and, you know, and that's how I ended up.
So you drifted into frontline success, effortlessly, without even trying.
I was just very lucky, right place, right time.
But it is true, isn't it, that in fact your interest in design goes back to '85 when you happened to see your wife modeling for Pierre Cardin?
Well, that's when it clicked, because we were back in India, and I was at that point selling oilfield equipment, and was just, I mean, awful, and trying to, you know, sort of save my soul by doing little home theatre productions on the side with Pearl Padamsee in Bombay, that I went to see this fashion show purely by coincidence, because my wife Sal had gone to see if she could help us in usher or something, and they said, well, will you please come and audition when they're choosing the models? We're looking for tall Indian girls. And so she did, and so I ended up at the show. I mean, it's something that I would have never done. It wouldn't even have crossed my mind, you know.
In fact, to tell you the truth, you were selling oil filters at the time. You were a businessman in Bombay. So what actually attracted you to design?
I've always been attracted to design. I've always loved design. If it's just to rearrange things, color, pattern. I always sketched. I mean, I think I was, you know, my teachers in school were always furious with the way I turned in my books, because there'd be legs, books, bags, you know, motifs, you know, processions drawn, jewelry. I mean, I can't sit in a meeting even today without doodling. I have to be, you know, creating something. It's of no significance or great beauty, very often hideous little doodles, but, you know, it's just kind of a habit.
Your father tells a lovely story. He says there was an occasion when Air Chief Marshal Latif, who was the Air Force chief, dropped in, and his wife admired the decor at your home, and your father had to laugh and say, it's my son who's done it.
Yes. Well, at this point, my father's living alone because my mother had passed away, and so I turned her back from school or wherever I was, and sure enough, this house was sort of lying around in crates and boxes. But, you know, it just was a natural, normal thing for me to do. If I want to do architecture, if I want to do design, these are just logical progressions. I mean, they're all sort of parts, different facets of one interest, so to speak.
Okay, as you say, you followed your instinct and went into design, but in fact, you did it very sensibly, because in '87, you opened your own first outlet, Ensemble.
Yeah.
Today, it's a roaring success. But way back then, was it a risky gamble?
Oh, it was a huge gamble. But I was just lucky in that because this property was owned by a family-owned business, I was able to talk them into letting me doing this. Because what's the downside? I mean, if it bombs, you still have your property. I mean, this property was used as a kind of huge warehouse for machine tools. And they were basically the machine tools that were rusting and didn't sell. So you went in there, and there were creaking lathes and hideous old drilling machines that have been lying there for 5 years, you know, literally gathering rust and falling apart.
And you're literally telling me you smooth-talked your way into changing the family opinion about the property?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like they had a huge revenue coming out of it. And so I said, listen, we'll do this store, and we'll promote Indian design, and they're like, okay, fine, as long as the oilfield equipment goes on and, you know, the machine tool business goes on. So when we started, actually, I used to moonlight. I used to be working on this part-time, and I'd come and sit with the architects in the evening and sneak an hour out here and sneak an hour out there, because at that time, in fact, we were still selling oilfield equipment and doing the machine tool, you know, business, and between going off to meet designers, I'd have to rush off to Jamnagar or something.
I can spot the business graduate behind the designer very clearly. You've got yourself working at several levels, haven't you?
Yeah, but it took a huge toll. And the moment this worked, let me tell you, I was out of there. There's no machine tool business. There's no oil field business left today. Because I said, listen, I'm not interested. Someone else in the family is interested. By all means, go run it, but I'm not going to carry this mantle.
But in fact, once Ensemble had actually established itself, and for 4 years you'd been in design, you took another very critical step. You moved off and enrolled yourself at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Was that because, having been in design, now you were determined to become a designer in your own right?
Well, yes. And to do that, to enable one to do that, I think you had to know technique. You always have to know technique. I mean, if you look at Indian fashion, or the people, you know, we have a crafts tradition here. We work with fabrics, we work with embroideries, we work with different techniques, beautiful techniques in weaving. I mean, incredible things. But there's very little concept of fit in fashion, because Indian fashion traditionally has not relied on the structured garment. It's all about textile that people wrap in different ways.
So this is what you wanted to teach yourself?
Well, how to cut and fit and how to drape. Not drape as in throw a chadar on yourself or wear a beautiful shawl elegantly.
But hug the body and
But
form
how to
lines.
body and how to construct a garment that looks like it's draped. You know, that's a very different ball game than taking a piece of cloth and someone wrapping it beautifully like a sari. But how do, if I wanted to make a sari as a gown, how I should be able to do it? That for me was the essence. Garment construction, pattern making, and just knowing technique, how to understand fabric. Every fabric has a different property.
And a concept that is so different, not just to the way the sari is worn and looks, but also different to the way, say, the kurta pajama or the shalwar kameez looks.
Absolutely. And if you look at pajamas in this country, they're on drawstrings and one size fits all. It's not about contouring. And modern fashion today, even in India, is becoming about hugging the body. I mean, people want things that are slimming, that, you know, are close to the body, that you can move. They want Western concepts of armholes. And you have to do functional things in these things. I mean, you have to sit and get up and get into a car, whatever it is that
So
you
it
have
has
to
to
do.
look pretty at one end and be efficient and effective at the other.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this whole, you know, the days of wrapping huge, beautiful textiles are over. I mean, you know, they'll be worn at ceremonial things or weddings and, you know, that sort of thing.
So when Vogue magazine, as Isabella Blow did in her column there, calls you the Karl Lagerfeld of India, do you see that as a compliment, or are you a bit irritated by the fact that they keep comparing you to others?
Well, if you knew Isabella Blow, you take it as a huge compliment. I mean, she doesn't, and more than that, for me, I mean, Karl Lagerfeld, you know, who's a great fashionist. I mean, stamina affable, Rankunsa, maverick designer, an opinion on everything, and what he's done to the house of Chanel, my God, if I did half in here for this industry and for my own company, I think it'd be fine. And I'm flattered by it.
You've done some incredible things yourself, haven't you? You, for instance, have had some amazing commissions. Jemima Khan's wedding outfit. How much of a challenge was that?
Well, it was a challenge only because Jemima, who was up to this point used to running around in kind of very modern clothes, was suddenly now getting into shalwar kameez mode to wear things to her neck. I mean, she had worn something of mine to her nikah already in Paris. I needed something for this big reception in Pakistan. And so, you know, it's always hard when you're dealing with somebody who basically is now switching styles of dress.
Because they don't know how to wear the new outfit.
Well,
They're
and
not used
also
to it.
because they're still concerned that it should be a certain way, it should be streamlined. I mean, because they want Western fashion and find Western fashion on that, they're conscious of fit and finish, you know. If you just send some embroidered sack with the pajama and nana, it wouldn't do, you know.
So this was really a huge challenge. You were blending into Indian design and concept what you'd learned at the FIT.
And also she wanted it to be very subtle, you know. She wouldn't, no shocking pink with, you know, gold zardozi for Jemima, you know. And so, and skin color type and so on and so forth. So actually, and she wasn't here, she was in London and I was in Bombay, so we were kind of working on the telephone and through her sister. And of course I did go to fit her.
Were you happy with the way she looked when she wore it?
Yeah, I was. I mean, she is beautiful. She has a great figure, and I mean, it needed to be tucked. And I don't think in the couture you can ever work without a fitting, because that's really what makes the difference. I mean, if you get 3 identical suits made for yourself, you're going to have each one fitted individually, because there's always a little difference in the way the fabric sits or this or that. And yeah, I was very happy.
You know, you spent a lot of time talking about the importance of clothes fitting the individual they're made for.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, is a very Western concept. Now, you've done some amazing things with saris. For most Indians, the sari is very traditional, very conventional. Do they react badly when you change the way it's worn?
That's a good question. I think there has been some criticism from people, the purists, so, you know, but I have no regard for that.
Close your ears and shut your eyes.
Well, you know, my attitude, I couldn't be bothered. I think it's fun, fashion has to evolve. You know, I have to say that by making the sari, you know, 10, 15 years back, I actually thought the sari was on its way out. Because, you know, there was still a kind of big bulky handloom, and, you know, everybody wore their kanjivarams, and of course there are many beautiful weaves that are still worn by many women and look wonderful. But for the younger generation growing up, they kind of associated that with their grandmothers. It didn't feel sexy, it didn't feel evening, and not then everyone switched to wearing lehengas when they get married.
So you were determined to put the sexiness back into the
Well, yeah, and you can do it in fun ways. You can make the blouses amazing, you can do them as corsets. I've done beaded petticoats where the saris chopped to like 6 or 8 or 10 inches.
Something that made every grandmother's hair pop open with shock.
And wish she was 30 years younger so she could jump right into one of them and, you know, see that. So I have no problem with it. And at the same time, I mean, I love beautiful textile, and I think there's a great value in wearing it traditionally, and wearing that same old textile with the corset, or wearing the corset with the piece of chiffon.
Am I right in saying that you enjoy making things different just because in difference lies something new, something changing?
Well, I think that, you know, I mean, this is a constant tussle when you're designing a collection, because you understand that, you know, 70% of people who are going to come and shop actually just want to get to
what
update
they see someone else
themselves. Well, or just update it. They're not looking to make a statement. They want something that's functional, that's beautiful, that feels luxurious and fits well, and that's enough. I mean, you know, if a man goes out to buy a suit, he's not looking to, you know, find a lapel that stands up just to be different. He just wants something that feels good. And a lot of women shop in the same way. But there's also the fun for me is also to go out there and try things, you know, and not, I don't think just for the sake of doing it. Look, we are changing, we're changing as a society, we're changing with the influences, and I think fashion mirrors this. And, you know, so if you just stayed in a rut, doing the same things, doing the same embroideries, I mean, what's the point? Besides, in India, to survive in business, Karan, you have to change, because we're, you know, a nation of the greatest knockoffs. So you've always got to be one step ahead, because boom, 3 months later, it's everywhere, horrible, watered down, badly made copies that, you know.
In which case, Tarun, answer this for me. As perhaps one of the most leading fashion designers in the country today, how would you answer the question, what is fashion? Is it trendiness and avant-garde modern fashion? Or is it stylishness? Or is it, in fact, a reflection of the individual's personality? Which is it?
For me, I think it has to be a reflection of the individual's personality. I mean, so you can actually fit into many different shades, and you might sometimes be a little more this or that, but I think it actually works for the individual if they're true to themselves, their personality, what they're comfortable with.
You mean frumpy old me could be fashionable as well?
Absolutely. It's a point of view, it's a style, and it's being consistent in the style. That is your fashion.
So if you can carry it off, you're fashionable, and if you feel awkward or look awkward,
well, you
you're
shouldn't
not.
wear it. Just go back to what you're comfortable with.
How difficult is that sort of self-realization? Or how difficult is it to convince people that what they look best in is the right thing for them,
well,
even if they
oddly
don't
enough,
themselves?
it is quite difficult a lot of the time, because, you know, when people are secure and kind of sure of themselves, that they don't need anyone to even convince them, because they just know that. And if they're insecure, then in fact they're trying to keep up with what other people are wearing or what they've seen in this latest show or whatever, whether it suits them or not. And that's actually sometimes quite awful to see, you know, someone kind of squeezing themselves into something that's 4 sizes too small because they just have to have it and it just looks wrong. And more often than not, they might not have the personality to carry something off.
What about yourself? Do you follow fashion, or do you set the standards for others and opt out yourself?
Completely opt out. I wear simple black. Everything I have like 8 black T-shirts, and then every day whatever comes into the wash goes right back on. But I think that that's just a privilege when you work in a studio and you look at fabrics, colors, and textiles all day. The last thing you want to do when you're standing in one front of your own cupboard is to have to make a choice.
Are you also saying that the last thing you want to do is have to wear something you've created?
No, I love wearing things I created. They're usually very comfortable. So I'm
But
very
you
happy
don't want to
that
be your own model?
No.
Taru, let's take a break. I want to come back in part 2 and talk about the man who refuses to be his own model, the actual Tarun Tehiliani. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. My guest is the designer Tarun Tehiliani. Tarun, let's talk about yourself. Your father was a sailor, he became an admiral, he ended up as Navy chief. Your mother was both a model and an engineer. They sound like the most amazing parents.
They were the most amazing parents. And I think that that's actually why I was allowed to, from a very young age, kind of really pursue things that interested me. So I grew up in Bombay, and for me it was music and theatre, the piano. I loved art, and there was never any pressure to ever conform or, you know, kind of be something that you're not comfortable. I mean, just to go out and do what you wanted to do. If these were your interests, then you did them, as long as you did them well, you know.
It is very interesting because most sons of service officers, maybe even sons of engineers, tend to feel that Mummy and Daddy wouldn't want me to be a free spirit. They wouldn't want me to be an artist, leave aside a fashion designer. Did you ever feel constrained?
Well, I did, actually. But I don't think it was Mummy and Daddy's fault. It's just the time I grew up in, that I wasn't aware enough of wanting to be the free spirit. And I think that free spirit is getting a little more buoyant as
a little freer and more
freer,
spirited.
yeah, more spirited. Which I keep telling everyone is very worrying. I mean, you know, who knows what I'm going to be doing at 50 or 60. But no, it was fine. I mean, of course, my father did apparently try to suggest that I should, because I love planes as well, join, you know, he was a naval aviator, that I should join the Navy. And apparently I was taken off to some psychologist and asked to draw things. And I drew this little army marching along with one soldier falling down. And I said that was me, because I absolutely hated being
That was a message to your father
That
as
was
well,
a very
was it?
clear, unequivocal message to my father that, listen, that's out. You know, I'm in going through Lion's Gate. That's that. And then there was a little thing, why don't you do sciences and become an engineer before you
That was Mummy
do an
speaking to you,
MBA.
was it?
Yeah, well, both of them, and yeah, unfortunately she had passed away when I was in, you know, a senior in high school, but by this point there was this whole thing, become an engineer, go to IIT. I'm like, listen, I can't balance an equation after 3 years. What do you think I'm going to go, you know, be an engineer? I actually did join Jai Hind for like a week in Bombay and took sciences, and there was some third law of multiple proportions, which he explained to me 6 times, and I just sat there blank, and I just got up and said, I'm out of this. You know?
But there was something you discovered very early, a talent that I believe you discovered you had at 5. And Pearl Padamsee is the one who recognized it, an ability to draw.
Well, Pearl was fantastic. Pearl was associated with the school that I went to, Campion, and I used to do theatre. Yeah, but I always drew. I mean, for me, I think that's kind of, it was almost like a therapy to draw, to paint.
That was your self-expression.
Yeah, and there were some really wonderful people in Bombay at that time who are still around, Marina Datta, for instance, who we used to go to classes. And, you know, it was all about just playing with materials and taking the most mundane things like matchboxes and building things that, to your eye, if they were beautiful, that's all that mattered, you know. I mean, a kind of a development of your own sensibility, if you like, from nothing. Because, you know, everyone works with the same materials. It's what you do it and how you see it at the end of the day. And, I mean, if you're lucky enough that everyone agrees with you, that's brilliant. And there are times when you're going to see something that nobody else does, which, I mean, there's no right or wrong in this, you know.
But you were, at that point in time, an artist. You then went off to the Doon School.
Yeah.
What happened to art over there? Did you get a chance to further it, or was it crushed by the weight of being uniform and similar?
No, actually, Doon was quite good with the whole art department. I mean, although it was a bit limited in its scope. I mean, it was either sculpture or watercolors or whatever, and I did a lot of drawing. And it was fine, and you could spend enough time there. It was actually a very nice environment in the art school. What did suffer was the music, because, you know, they'd have one piano, but people would be jumping and lying up on the keyboards and kind of, I mean, it was a wreck, basically. So classical piano kind of went down the tubes. But that was fine. There were many other compensations for being in that school.
You said something very interesting about Doon School. You said that the Indianness in you was imbibed in school. Now, most Indians look upon Doon School as anything but Indian, so aren't you being a bit contradictory?
Well, no, because, you know, I grew up in Colaba, South Bombay, where it was kind of Parsi haven, and everyone ran around to piano classes, and, you know, Pearl Padamsee and Alec did their little theatre, and, you know, people went to church. I mean, it was, you know, the Amma spoke English. You know, Hindi was, you know, Bera, Pani Lao sort of thing, you know, very post-colonial, very cut off from India. I mean, you know, I have to say, when I came to Delhi in '72 for a year and a half, it was a completely different ball game. And then going to Doon with half of Punjab sitting, you know, in those dorms was extraordinary, you know. And more than just being in that school and getting to meet people and getting along, because, you know, in South Bombay you met people who came from very similar backgrounds, and, you know, that was the way everybody lived and talked and socialized and so on and so forth. So it was very different going to Doon. It might be very elitist in today's context, and perhaps was even back then, but you just met, there were people from Bhatinda and Gurdaspur and Kashmir, and we've never even heard about them. Very different. I mean, their families, the way they lived, you know, they came from big agricultural communities.
So did you enjoy Doon School?
I did in the beginning and not so much in the middle, but by the end of it, I loved it because I was very comfortable in it. And we also traveled a lot in that whole area, you know. We spent a lot of time in the hills.
So when you say that the Indianness in you was imbibed, are you also saying that much of the Tarun I see in front of me today is in some way a creation of the child that went through Doon School?
Yeah, because I think that if I had stayed on in Bombay, I'd have grown up very, very, in a way, limited, very sheltered. I mean, my only option would have been at that, I think, to have gone off abroad because you're so cut off. But you know, here you just grew up. You had to learn. You had to learn to develop the ability to survive, to get along, to accept, and also you spend time in. You know, you were just thrown out. You know, to travel around the hills. You know, I mean, cycling around for days, and it made you very comfortable with this whole place. I mean, I grew to love it actually.
You know, your life went through many cycles and changes after Doon School, but one of the resting points was that you spent several years in America at Rosemont College and later on at Wharton.
Yeah.
How important, looking back, was the American influence?
Actually, for me, because I actually started out at Vassar College doing economics, and then spent a summer at Stanford, and then finally went to Wharton where I graduated. You know, it was all right. I mean, it was not. When I look back, it's kind of almost a blur because, to be honest, I wasn't really doing academically what I loved. So I mean, I was going through the motions.
You were marking time.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't think so at that time. You know, my father's going to be very upset to hear this. But certainly looking back, in terms of what I got, I never says, oh, well, you know, you understand how to read a balance sheet. Well, let me tell you, I've forgotten, you know. And
happily.
I failed accounting and, you know, there was all this trauma, and I used to be running off to life drawing classes. I should have just been in art school, and I've been much happier, or fashion school, or whatever. I mean, it was okay, but the great thing about America, which I came away with, certainly was that it truly was in many ways. I mean, of course, it does. Every country has its elites, blah blah blah, but it was egalitarian. You know, my friends were children of mechanics and this, and people, the janitors roamed around the corridors, and everyone behaved just as nicely and polite with them. And there was a sense of equality there that even today it's impossible to have even in your own homes, because you tell someone, you know, you're welcome, you don't have to sit on the floor. You try and treat people equally.
And you value that experience.
Oh,
you value the lesson that you brought back.
Hugely. I mean, you know, I can roam around and, you know, I work all day with people who may not make 7,000 rupees a day, who are from Bihar, who do embroideries, and sometimes go out to dinner with people who have private jets. But, you know, it just, once you realize that it's all level, I mean, these are different situations, or they're economically different, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter, you know. And I think that that's something that America did teach me, which I do value.
And that's something you're going to keep with you always?
Oh, always. Absolutely. I mean, I don't understand any other way.
Tarun Tehiliani, a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.